the Galactic Council falls into chaos as humanity walks away from diplomacy. The chair scraped against the marble floor of the council chamber, and every head in the room turned toward me. Not because I stood up, not because I made a sound. They turned because I had not moved in 4 hours, and in a room full of creatures that shifted, clicked, buzzed, and performed their anxieties in every biological way imaginable, stillness had become the loudest thing in the building. My name is Yale Marin. I am the 37th human ambassador to the Galactic Council, and I had been sitting in seat 41 since 6 in the morning. The session had descended into open argument before 9. It was now past noon, and the Grand Arbiter had already called 3 recesses that nobody respected. The Velthari delegation was on its feet again. Their lead speaker, a tall, iridescent creature called Delegate Sorvin, had been talking for 11 minutes without stopping. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the target of his speech. He was talking about Earth. Specifically, he was talking about the water purification proposal that our science division had submitted 14 months ago. A modest proposal. Practical. It would have brought clean water infrastructure to 6 developing colony worlds, 3 of which were not even human-aligned. We had done the math, run the models, and submitted a document so thorough that even the Keth Collective's review board had approved it for consideration. Sorvin was explaining, in that particular tone that species use when they believe their contempt is too sophisticated to be noticed, that the proposal was charming in its ambition but naive in its scope. Charming. I wrote that word in my notebook. I have a paper notebook, actual paper from Earth. People find this strange. The council chambers are equipped with holographic recording systems, quantum-synced memory pads, and neural uplink stations for the species that use them. I bring paper and a pen. I have done this for 11 years. It is the only eccentricity I permit myself in this room. Delegate Sorvin continued. He said that Earth's proposal, while well-intentioned, failed to account for the complex diplomatic sensitivities of allocating resources across contested sectors. He said this with the confidence of someone who has never been thirsty a day in his life, representing a civilization that controls 3 of the 6 water-scarce colonies he was now pretending to protect. Laughter moved through the chamber, not loud laughter, the polished, restrained laughter of powerful beings who know better than to be openly rude. A quiet ripple of amusement that passed from the Velthari seats to the Durrani block, to the smaller delegations who always laughed when the big ones did, because that is how survival works in rooms like this. I looked at the proposal document on the desk in front of me. 14 months of work, 43 scientists, engineers, and logistics coordinators. A plan that would have given clean water to roughly 60 million beings who currently did not have reliable access to it. I drew a line under the word charming. Then I wrote 2 more words beneath it, just 2. I closed the notebook. Across the chamber, Delegate Sorvin finished his remarks to quiet approval. The vote was called. The proposal failed. 22 votes in favor, including all of Earth's allies, which were few, 39 against. The record would show it had been tabled for future reconsideration, which is what the council says when it means no. I gathered my documents. My aide, a young man named Oliver, leaned toward me from the row behind. Ambassador, do you want to submit a formal rebuttal? I considered this. I have submitted 41 formal rebuttals in 11 years. Of those, 6 were acknowledged with written responses. Of those 6 responses, 0 resulted in any change of outcome. No, I said. Send a copy of the session recording to the archive team on Earth. Flag it for the Deputy Minister's review. Which flag? I looked at him, green. Oliver had only been my aide for 7 months, so he did not yet know what green meant. The senior staff did. Green meant, file this. We are keeping records, do not respond, do not escalate, do not react. Green meant, we are watching. I had used that flag 207 times in 11 years. Nobody on the council knew it existed. I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked out at the chamber. The session had already moved on. Earth's failed proposal was no longer being discussed. The beings who had laughed at it had already forgotten it. That is one of the cruelties of power. The powerful forget what they do. The powerless remember everything. 2 centuries ago, when humanity first made contact with the galactic community, we were treated as something between a novelty and a cautionary tale. A species that had nearly destroyed itself 3 times over, that had clawed its way from a single blue world with nothing but stubbornness and curiosity, that had arrived at faster-than-light travel 40 years, behind every projection the Council had made about our development timeline, largely because we had taken a detour through 3 devastating wars and rebuilt ourselves from the rubble each time. The Council had expected us to be desperate, grateful, eager to belong. We were those things for a while. Humanity in its first 50 years at the Council was genuinely, earnestly trying. We proposed solutions. We offered resources. We volunteered for the assignments no one else wanted. We smiled through condescension that would have driven other species to walk out. And slowly, quietly, we learned. We learned the structure of the Council's economics. We learned which species owed which favors, and why, and for how long. We learned that the vote counts in this chamber had very little to do with what was right, and almost everything to do with who controlled what. We learned the geography of power in this galaxy the same way humans have always learned hard lessons, by being on the wrong end of it long enough to understand it completely. By the time I took my post, humanity knew this institution better than most of the species that had built it. I walked out of the session hall and into the long corridor that runs behind the main chamber. Through the observation windows, I could see the stars. We were at Council Station 7, a massive structure in neutral space between 4 major territorial boundaries. It had been built 300 years ago as a symbol of galactic unity. It was now a symbol of galactic habit. Everyone showed up because stopping would be awkward. Oliver fell into step beside me. He was trying to read my expression and failing, which was correct. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "the Velthari have submitted a request for a bilateral meeting tomorrow morning. Delegate Sorvin's office sent it 20 minutes ago." I did not stop walking. "Acknowledge receipt," I said. "Confirm nothing. Tell them our schedule is under review." "Yes, Ambassador, and the Deputy Minister wants a call." "Schedule it for tonight." "He said it was urgent." "I know what he said, Oliver. Schedule it for tonight." I turned the corner toward the human delegation's private offices. I stopped at the window at the end of the hall and looked out at the stars for a long moment. They did not look back. They never do. But they are patient, the stars. They have been burning for billions of years without anyone's permission or approval. I have always found that comforting. I opened my notebook to the page where I had written the word charming. Beneath it, those 2 words I had written, and then closed the book over. Begin review. I had written those 2 words 17 times before in 11 years. Each previous time, the review had concluded that continued engagement was still in Earth's interest, that patience remained the correct position, that we were not yet ready to ask the question that those 2 words pointed toward. Tonight, when I spoke to the Deputy Minister, I was going to recommend we stop reviewing and start deciding. The corridor was empty except for Oliver, who had learned in 7 months that when I stood at a window and looked at the stars, he was meant to be quiet. He was doing well. I had one more thing to do before the day ended. I went back to my desk, opened my secure communications terminal, and sent a single message to the Logistics Division at Earth's Council Support Network. The message contained 4 words and a file number. The file number referenced a planning document that had been drafted 8 years ago and updated every 6 months since. It had never been activated. It was called the Framework Assessment, and what it assessed was simple. What would happen to Earth, and to this council, if humanity decided to stop showing up? I had always hoped we would never need it. I sent the message anyway. Then I closed the terminal, picked up my notebook, and went to make tea. The deputy minister's face appeared on the screen at 2200 hours, station time. His name was Leon Gardner, and he had the look of a man who had not slept well in several days. I recognized it because I had that look too, though I hid mine better. "Yale," he said, "I watched the session recording." "Then you understand why I flagged it." "I do. What I want to understand is the flag level." He paused. "Green. You've used green 207 times. This is the first time you've followed it immediately with a request to activate the framework assessment." 208 times, I said, "and yes." He was quiet for a moment. Leon Gardner was not a man who wasted silence. When he was quiet, he was thinking, and when he was thinking, the right thing to do was to let him finish. "The assessment was never meant to be a threat," he said. "It is not a threat," I said. "It is a measurement. I want to know exactly what the current numbers say. I want updated data on every node, every relay, every contract, every system that touches this council and runs through Earth-managed infrastructure. I want to know precisely what our actual position is. And if the position is what we think it is." I looked at him steadily. "Then we stop pretending it isn't." Leon rubbed his face. "Yale, if this goes the direction you're suggesting, it is not going to be quiet. The council will respond." "I know. The Velthari alone have 17 diplomatic channels they can activate." "I know. And you want to do this because of one vote." I shook my head. "I want to do this because of 208 votes, because of 41 rebuttals that changed nothing, because of 14 months of work from 43 people that was called charming and dismissed in 11 minutes. Today was not different from any other day, Leon. That is exactly the problem. It should have been different by now. We have been here for 2 centuries. We have earned different." He looked at me for a long time. "I'll authorize the assessment review," he said. "Preliminary data in 72 hours. "Thank you." "Yale, be careful." "I am always careful," I said. "That is why it has taken us 200 years to get to this conversation." I closed the terminal. The station was quiet at this hour. Most delegations kept reduced staff overnight, and the main corridors were dim. Through my office window, the stars continued their patient burning. I opened my notebook to a new page. At the top, I wrote one word: "Ready." Then I closed it and went to sleep, which is something humans do that most of this galaxy still finds faintly unnerving. We go completely unconscious for hours at a time, trusting the world to continue without us. I had always thought that was not a weakness. It was practice. Practice for the moment when we would step back entirely and let everyone else discover, in the silence we left behind, exactly how much of the world we had been quietly holding together. That moment was coming. I could feel it the way you feel a change in the weather, not the storm itself, but the stillness before it, the particular quality of quiet that means something is about to shift. I was ready. Earth was ready. We had been ready for a long time. We had simply been waiting to be absolutely certain. The fracture happened on a Tuesday. It was not, as fractures rarely are, a surprise. Not to me. Not to anyone who had read the reports our intelligence analysts had been filing for the past 19 months. The Velthari and the Keth Collective had been building toward this moment the way a storm builds, with quiet pressure accumulating layer by layer until the atmosphere simply cannot hold it any longer. What was a surprise, even to me, was how fast it fell apart once it started. I was in the middle of a routine session, watching the agenda item on navigational corridor disputes move through its usual slow arc of procedure, when the Keth delegate, a compact, precise being named Vorath, stood and interrupted the floor without being recognized. In 400 years of Galactic Council records, the Keth had interrupted a session without recognition exactly once before. Every being in the chamber went still. "The Keth Collective," Vorath said, in that flat, even voice that somehow conveyed more intensity than shouting, "formally withdraws its agreement to the Velthari Navigation Treaty of the year 291. The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then the chamber erupted. I wrote the time in my notebook. I wrote Vorath's exact words. I wrote the names of the 6 delegations that immediately began speaking privately to each other across the floor. I noted which ones looked alarmed and which ones looked, in ways they were trying to conceal, quietly pleased. Delegate Sorvin was on his feet within seconds, his voice cutting through the noise. He called the Keth withdrawal a provocation, a violation of foundational council principles, and an act that the Velthari would not allow to pass without formal response. Each of those phrases had a specific diplomatic meaning that translated, in ordinary language, to, "We are considering this an act close to open conflict." Vorath sat back down without responding. The Keth Collective does not argue. They state, and they act. It is one of the things that makes them extremely difficult to negotiate with. I had written a report about this possibility 19 months ago. The full title was Assessment of Velthari-Keth Treaty Stability Under Continued Resource Pressure in the Orvan Sector. It was 68 pages long. I had submitted it through the standard reporting channel. It had been acknowledged by the Council's administrative office and assigned a reference number. No one had acted on it. I was not surprised. I want to be clear about that. I was not surprised, and I was not angry in the way that people imagine anger when they picture a dramatic moment. The feeling was quieter than that. It was the specific, tired feeling of watching something happen that you told people was going to happen, and understanding that the failure was not yours. The Grand Arbiter called an emergency recess. Delegations poured into the side corridors. Oliver appeared at my shoulder. "Ambassador, Delegate Sorvin's office has already sent 3 messages." "I know, what do they say?" "They want an urgent bilateral meeting. They say it's about stabilizing the situation." I found that interesting. 17 minutes ago, Delegate Sorvin had been laughing at a human water proposal. Now he wanted Earth's help stabilizing a crisis. "Tell them we received their message," I said. "And that's all, tell them we received it." Oliver looked uncertain, but he typed it. The Grand Arbiter approached our section of the corridor. His name was Pelith, and he was one of the older beings in this institution, a large, slow-moving creature of remarkable intelligence and even more remarkable political caution. He had been Arbiter for 30 years. In that time, I had watched him navigate 17 crises by doing the minimum necessary to prevent the worst outcome and calling it success. He looked at me with the expression that powerful beings use when they need something from someone they have not previously valued. "Ambassador Marin," he said, "Earth's reputation for neutrality makes you uniquely positioned to assist in this moment." I looked at him calmly. "What would you like, Grand Arbiter?" "We would like Earth to serve as initial mediator in the Velthari-Keth situation. Your delegation's impartiality." "Our impartiality," I said pleasantly, "is a consequence of the fact that neither the Velthari nor the Keth have historically found it worth their time to involve us in their affairs. I want to be honest with you about that, because honesty is something I think this institution needs more of." Pelith blinked slowly. "Ambassador." "I will take your request to my government," I said. "I expect to have a response within 48 hours. This was a significant thing to say. Council mediations are typically confirmed or declined within 4 hours. 48 hours was, in diplomatic terms, a very long time. Long enough to say, "We are not at your service on your schedule." Pelith understood this. He was too experienced not to, but he was also too experienced to show that he understood it. "Of course," he said, "we appreciate Earth's consideration." He moved away. I watched him go. Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "Is 48 hours actually how long it will take?" "No," I said. "I already know what my government will say." "Then why?" "Because the answer matters less than the fact that we made them wait for it." I turned and walked back toward our offices. "The Council has spent 200 years not waiting for Earth. We can take 48 hours. Oliver followed without another word. Back in my office, I opened my secure terminal. The framework assessment preliminary report had arrived 31 hours ahead of schedule. That told me something. The team back on Earth had been ready for this request. They had perhaps been expecting it. I opened the report and read it carefully. The data was organized in sections, by category of infrastructure and by degree of dependence. I read each section twice. When I finished, I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I looked at the report again because the numbers were not what I had expected. Not because they were smaller than anticipated, because they were larger, significantly larger. In the years since the framework assessment had first been drafted, Earth had continued doing what Earth does. We had staffed the relay hubs that needed staffing. We had built the medical stations that needed building. We had maintained the communication lines that nobody else wanted to maintain. We had done it without announcement, without political credit, without asking for anything in return. We had simply done the work. And the work had accumulated. The report showed that roughly 31% of the Council's critical logistics infrastructure now passed through nodes that were directly managed, staffed, or maintained by Earth-contracted personnel or Earth-built systems. Supply chains, emergency medical networks, deep space communication relays, navigation data servers. 31%. In a healthy, functioning galactic community, that number would not be remarkable. It would simply mean that Earth was a productive and valued member of the community, contributing its fair share. In a community that had spent 2 centuries treating Earth as a minor presence, as a curiosity, as something between a charity case and an amusing distraction, that number was an extraordinary thing. It meant that the Council had built a significant portion of its daily functioning on a foundation it had never looked at closely enough to understand. I sent Oliver home for the night. I told him to rest. He was young and had not yet learned that in moments like this, rest is not laziness, it is preparation. Then I composed a message to Leon Gardner. It was not long. "Preliminary data received," I wrote. "The number is 31%. Begin preparation for Phase 2 of the assessment. I will brief you in the morning." I paused before sending it, looked at the report one more time. Then I added one more line. "They do not know." I sent the message. I sat in the quiet of my office with the lights turned low and the stars visible through the window, and I thought about how a thing can be large enough to hold up a significant piece of the world, and invisible enough that nobody notices it's there until the moment it is not. Humans are very good at being invisible when we choose to be. It is not a skill we were taught. It is a skill we develop the same way we develop most things, through long experience of being overlooked. I went to make tea. When I came back, there were 47 messages from 6 different delegations, all received within the past hour. Most of them were in various diplomatic languages, variations of the same question: where does Earth stand? I read each one. I did not respond to any of them. I did, however, pull up the framework assessment again and spend another 2 hours reviewing the specific systems and personnel lists attached to each infrastructure category. I was looking for redundancies, places where other species or organizations had built parallel capacity, places where, if Earth stepped back, the gap would close quickly on its own. There were fewer of those than I had hoped. More, in fact, than I had allowed myself to expect. I closed the report and wrote in my notebook for a while. Not diplomatic notes, just thoughts. The kind of writing I do when I need to understand what I actually think, separate from what I am supposed to think. What I wrote was this: we did not plan this. We did not build toward this moment as a strategy. We simply worked consistently over decades in the places nobody else was watching. The power we now appear to hold is not power we sought. It is the natural consequence of showing up every day without credit or recognition and doing what needed to be done. That is a very human story. It is also, I think, about to become a very important one. The Velthariketh fracture was widening. I could feel it in the volume of the diplomatic communications flooding every channel on the station. Other species were starting to move, choosing positions, testing alliances. The Council was beginning to behave the way large, rigid structures behave when their foundations develop cracks. Everything vibrates, everything becomes uncertain. And sitting at the center of this gathering uncertainty, I was thinking about a 60 million person water infrastructure proposal that had been called charming. I did not intend to call that word back. I did not want an apology. I wanted something far more significant than an apology. I wanted the future to be shaped differently than the past. The next morning, I met with Leon on an encrypted channel and briefed him on the full report. He listened without interrupting, which is something he does when the information is serious enough that he does not want to risk missing any of it. When I finished, there was a pause. 31%, he said. Yes. And they don't know. They have never asked. You cannot discover a thing you have never looked for. Another pause, then. Yale, what are you recommending? I had thought about this answer for most of the night. I wanted to be precise. I am not recommending a confrontation, I said. I am recommending that we stop pretending our leverage does not exist. I am recommending that we use this moment, when the Council is distracted and unstable, to make clear that Earth is not a minor player being tolerated at a table built by others. We built significant portions of this table. It is time for everyone to know that. And if they push back, then we learn what they are willing to offer in exchange for our continued cooperation. That is called negotiation. It is supposed to be what this institution is for. And if they won't negotiate? I was quiet for a moment. Then we review our participation status, I said, formally, and we let the review speak for itself. Leon was quiet for a very long time. Authorization approved, he said at last. Proceed with Phase 2. Keep it quiet until you're ready. I am always quiet, I said. It is one of the things this Council has never understood about us. I ended the call, picked up my notebook, and turned to a clean page. At the top I wrote Phase 2. Then I began to write names. Every delegation we had received messages from, every system mentioned in the assessment report, every node, every hub, every data relay that quietly carried the weight of a civilization that had never once said thank you. I wrote until my hand was tired. Then I looked at what I had written. It was a map. Not a map of space. A map of everything Earth had built that this Council had been standing on, unknowingly, for decades. I had been patient for 11 years. I had been patient for 2 centuries, collectively, as a species. I was going to be patient for a little while longer. But the map was drawn now. And once you have drawn a map, it becomes very difficult to pretend the territory does not exist. The data leak happened on a Thursday afternoon, and within 6 hours it had changed everything. I was in a side meeting with the Durrani bloc, a quiet group of 3 species that had always been polite to Earth in the specific way of people who are not sure yet if you matter, when Oliver sent me an urgent message on my personal line. I excused myself and stepped into the corridor. What is it? The Keth Collective's internal communications have been leaked, Oliver said. His voice was carefully controlled, which told me it was serious. Administrative channels, not military. But one of the documents in the leak contains a full reference index of third-party infrastructure dependencies. It lists every external system the Keth rely on for their supply network. I understood immediately, and Earth is in it. Earth is throughout it, Ambassador. The document lists 46 separate infrastructure nodes. Earth-managed systems appear in 31 of them. The media distribution services picked it up 12 minutes ago. It is already being translated into 14 languages. I stood in the corridor and let that settle. I had not planned this. I want to be precise about that. The leak had nothing to do with Earth. It was a consequence of the Velthari Keth breakdown, some internal security failure in the chaos of a diplomatic collapse. But the document it exposed was real. The numbers were accurate, and now the entire council was about to read them. Oliver, I said, go back to the office. Pull every message we receive in the next 3 hours. Do not respond to anything. Log everything. Yes, Ambassador. There are already 14 incoming. I know, log them. I walked back into the Durrani meeting, apologized for the interruption, and brought the discussion to a polite but definite close. The Durrani representatives looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. Everyone was suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. I went to my office, sat down, and read the leaked document myself. It was, in the language of bureaucratic infrastructure reports, quite dry. Lists of systems, reference codes, dependency categories. But what it showed to anyone who understood what they were reading was a detailed portrait of how much of the Keth Collective's daily operations depended on systems they did not own or control. And at the center of that portrait, again and again, were human-managed nodes. The messages coming in were extraordinary in their variety. Some were formal, some were panicked, some were carefully neutral in the way of beings who have just realized they may have miscalculated something important and do not yet know how to address it. The Velthari sent 6 messages in 2 hours. This was, by their standards, completely uncharacteristic. They are a deliberate species. 6 messages in 2 hours meant they were not being deliberate. They were reacting. At 4 in the afternoon, the Grand Arbiter requested an immediate meeting with the human delegation. I sent back a message confirming a meeting for the following morning. Not that afternoon, the following morning. I watched Oliver's face when I dictated that response. He was getting better at hiding his reactions, but not good enough yet. Is that strategic? He asked carefully. It is accurate, I said. I have 2 appointments this afternoon and I intend to keep them. The Arbiter can wait until tomorrow, so can the Velthari, so can everyone else. The appointments I had that afternoon were not diplomatic meetings. One was a call with the lead engineer of Earth's Council Infrastructure Division, a steady and very competent woman named Claire Dunmore, who had managed Earth's technical operations on the station for 11 years. The other was a routine check-in with the medical supply station coordinators, who needed authorization signatures for the next quarter's maintenance cycle. I kept both appointments. I signed the maintenance authorizations. I talked to Claire about routine system updates and seasonal personnel rotations. Anyone watching would have found it extremely boring. That was the point. The following morning, I met with Grand Arbiter Pelith in his formal reception chamber. It was a large room, deliberately built to emphasize the authority of the office. High ceilings, ordered light, everything arranged to signal permanence and power. I had been in this room many times. It had never impressed me as much as I suspected it was meant to. Pelith was not alone. He had brought 2 of his senior council liaisons. This told me the meeting was not informal. It was, despite its framing as a conversation, something closer to a negotiation. I brought Oliver and one of our senior legal advisors, a quiet and precise man named Henry Cole, who had been with our delegation for 9 years. We sat, Peelith offered the formal greeting. I returned it. The pleasantries took approximately 4 minutes. Then Peelith set his hands flat on the table. "Ambassador Marin," he said, "I will speak plainly." "Please," I said. "The document released yesterday has created a significant amount of uncertainty in this institution. There are concerns among member delegations about the extent of Earth's involvement in shared infrastructure, and about what that involvement means in terms of the Council's operational independence." I found this phrasing interesting. He said concerns about Earth's involvement rather than gratitude for Earth's contribution. This told me a great deal. "I understand there are concerns," I said. "I would be happy to address them. May I ask what specific concerns have been raised?" Peelith paused carefully. "Some delegations have suggested that the degree of Earth's presence in shared infrastructure was not fully disclosed to the Council." "The infrastructure is publicly registered," Henry said, speaking for the first time. His voice was pleasant and precise. "Every node is listed in the Council's open administrative registry. Every contract is on file. The information has always been available." "Of course," said Peelith's liaison, "but the cumulative picture was available to anyone who looked at the registry carefully," Henry said. "Earth did not hide anything. Earth filed paperwork. The Council has access to that paperwork. That is how transparency works." There was a pause. I let it breathe. Then Peelith said, with some care, "The Velthari delegation has formally requested that Earth agree to a restructuring of the infrastructure oversight arrangements. A joint management committee, with representation from the 6 largest Council blocks." I looked at him. "The Velthari," I said, "have formally requested that Earth share control of infrastructure that Earth built, staffed, funded, and maintains, with the 6 blocks that chose not to build, staff, fund, or maintain any of it." "Ambassador, the framing." "I am not being hostile," I said. "I am summarizing the proposal accurately. Please correct me if I have described it incorrectly." Peelith did not correct me. "I will take this proposal to my government," I said. "As with all formal proposals, I will provide a response in due course." "Ambassador, given the sensitivity of the current situation." "I understand the sensitivity," I said. "Earth has understood the sensitivity of a great many situations for a very long time. We have always responded thoughtfully, and we will do so again." I stood, Henry stood, Oliver stood. "Thank you for your time, Grand Arbiter," I said. "We look forward to continued dialogue." We left. In the corridor, Oliver walked quickly to keep pace with me. "What do we do with the Velthari proposal?" "Nothing yet," I said. "When?" "When I have decided what we are actually willing to agree to, which is different from what they are asking for, which is also different from what we are going to ultimately accept." I paused at the window, the stars again, steady and constant. "The Velthari have made a demand dressed as a request. That is fine. Demands tell you what someone is afraid of losing. They are afraid of losing access to infrastructure they do not control. That fear is information." "What do we do with the information?" I turned from the window. "We decide what Earth actually wants from this Council, not what we have been settling for. What we actually want, and then we figure out whether this institution is capable of providing it." I walked to my office. I sat at my desk. I pulled out my notebook and opened it to the page where I had been keeping a running summary of the situation. Then I picked up my pen and wrote at the bottom of the page, "They know now. The question is what they do with knowing." I turned to a fresh page. "The question after that is what we do with watching them decide." Outside, the station hummed with the particular energy of an institution in a state of controlled panic. Dozens of diplomatic teams were meeting, reassessing, recalculating. The leak had done what leaks do. It had let in the light, and what the light was showing was a picture that nobody had expected to see. Earth, quiet, patient, dependable, overlooked Earth. Everywhere, in the foundations, in the walls, in the systems that kept the whole complicated structure running. Not because we had planned a takeover, not because we had been scheming toward a moment of leverage, because we had done the work, for decades, consistently, without credit, without gratitude, without acknowledgement. And now everyone could see the work. I wondered if they understood yet what it meant, not just politically, not just strategically, but in a deeper sense. What it means when you discover that the person you have been dismissing has been quietly holding up part of the ceiling. What you feel in that moment is not respect, not initially. Initially, you feel something closer to fear, the fear of what would happen if they let go. I was about to give this council a very clear opportunity to answer that question for themselves. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I wrote one more line in my notebook. Phase 3. Then I closed it, straightened my jacket, and went back to work. The session hall was more crowded than I had ever seen it on an ordinary day. Not because an extraordinary item was on the agenda. The agenda, in fact, was deliberately routine. Navigation fee allocations, a minor trade adjustment in the outer sectors, a vote on scheduling the next infrastructure review committee meeting, the kind of agenda that would normally have half the seats empty by the third item. Every seat was full. Everyone wanted to watch Earth. I sat in seat 41, the same seat I had occupied for 11 years. I arranged my notebook and my pen on the desk in front of me. I poured a small cup of water from the carafe that the session staff always placed at each position, because humans drink water at meetings, and after 11 years the staff had simply incorporated this into their routine without comment. I drank the water, I looked at my agenda, I was entirely still. Across the chamber, I could feel delegations watching me without appearing to watch me. It is a skill most diplomats develop. The ability to observe someone in your peripheral vision while your eyes point somewhere else. I had learned it here. I suspected most of them were now regretting that I had. The Grand Arbiter opened the session. His voice was measured and correct. Nothing in his tone indicated that anything unusual was happening. This was itself a kind of message. The institution was choosing to proceed as normal, which is what institutions do when they are frightened. They perform normalcy as a signal that they are in control. The first 2 agenda items passed without incident. I voted where Earth had a position and abstained where we did not, exactly as usual. Then, during the brief transition to the third item, Delegate Sorvin stood. He was not recognized. He spoke anyway. The Velthari delegation requests an emergency item be added to the current agenda, he said. The item concerns the Council's framework for infrastructure oversight and the recent public disclosure of concentration risks within shared systems. A murmur moved through the chamber. The Grand Arbiter looked at him. Then, because declining would have looked worse than accepting, he recognized the motion. A show of hands. The item was added. I wrote in my notebook. Sorvin began speaking. He was good at this. I have to be fair about that. He was a skilled and practiced speaker, and he had prepared carefully. He spoke about the importance of collective stewardship. He spoke about the risks of over-reliance on any single member's contributions to shared systems. He spoke about the need for a balanced and transparent oversight structure. He did not say Earth's name, not once, but every sentence pointed at us. When he finished, the Arbiter opened the floor. 5 delegations spoke in quick succession, some in support of Sorvin's framing, some more cautious. The Keth Collective said nothing, which was itself a statement. 3 smaller delegations expressed what they called concerns about stability, which was their way of asking in public whether Earth was going to cooperate or not. The Arbiter looked at me. Ambassador Marin, does Earth wish to address the chamber? I stood. The room went quieter than a room that size should be able to go. Thank you, Grand Arbiter, I said. Earth would like to address the chamber. I looked out at the seats. I knew most of the faces looking back at me. I had watched them for 11 years. I knew their patterns, their habits, their preferred rhetorical moves. I knew which ones were genuinely uncertain and which ones were performing uncertainty. I knew which ones were afraid and which ones were calculating. The proposal before us, I said, asks Earth to share management authority over infrastructure that Earth has built and maintained, with bodies that did not build or maintain it. I want to acknowledge that this proposal has a certain logic to it. Shared governance is a reasonable principle. Earth supports shared governance in general. I paused. What Earth does not support is a process that begins with an emergency motion, bypasses the normal review committees, and arrives at a demand before it has engaged in any genuine conversation with the party most directly affected. The room was completely still. Earth received the Velthari's formal proposal yesterday morning, I continued. We reviewed it. I personally reviewed it. And what I found was a document that asked for a significant transfer of operational authority, offered nothing in exchange, and provided no analysis of how the proposed joint committee would actually function or improve outcomes for anyone. Delegate Sorvin began to rise. I continued without pausing. Earth is not opposed to restructuring the infrastructure arrangements. Earth is opposed to being told what the restructuring will look like without being asked what would make the restructuring work. Those are different things, and I believe this council understands the difference, even if the current moment makes it tempting to treat them as the same. Sorvin was on his feet. The Arbiter recognized him. Ambassador Marin, Sorvin said, the Velthari respect Earth's contributions. We are not proposing to diminish them. We are proposing to ensure that those contributions are supported by the collective. Delegate Sorvin, I said, and my voice was as even as I could make it. 14 months ago, Earth submitted a water infrastructure proposal for 6 colony worlds. 43 people spent 14 months on that proposal. You dismissed it in 11 minutes. You called it charming. The room went very still again. I am not raising that to embarrass anyone, I said. I am raising it because this council needs to understand something clearly. Earth does not have a short memory. We have a very long one. We have records going back 200 years of every proposal dismissed, every vote overridden, every moment when our contributions were used and our voice was not heard. We have kept those records carefully, and we are willing to have a genuine conversation about the future of this institution. But we will not have that conversation at speed, under pressure, on terms we did not agree to, in response to an emergency motion filed by the delegation that was laughing at us 14 months ago. I sat down. The silence lasted for 6 seconds. I counted. Then the chamber began to fill with sound again. Voices, rapid movement, the specific energy of a room that has just heard something it did not expect and does not know how to respond to. The Arbiter called a recess. In the corridor, 3 delegations approached me before I had taken 10 steps. I listened to each one. I said very little. I thanked them for their perspectives and told them Earth would be in touch. Oliver walked beside me, keeping up, saying nothing. When we reached our private corridor, he spoke. Ambassador, what happens now? Now, I said, we go back to Earth. He stopped walking. What? I am filing a formal 90-day suspension of Earth's Council participation today. Administrative review. It is a standard procedure that any member delegation can invoke. We have never used it before. Oliver looked at me carefully. We're leaving. We are pausing, I said. There is a difference. We will come back. But first, we are going to step back and let this institution feel what it has been standing on. And the infrastructure. The infrastructure will continue to function. Our personnel will continue to do their jobs. Essential systems will remain active. I paused. But non-essential coordination activities will shift to maintenance mode. Automated systems will manage routine functions. Our people will be recalled to Earth or to neutral stations pending the review. Oliver was quiet for a moment. They're going to react badly. Yes, I said. It might make things harder when we come back. It might, I said. Or it might mean that when we come back to a table where everyone has had 90 days to understand what Earth's participation actually means. One of those outcomes is much better for everyone. I walked to the window. The stars, the same stars. We have been patient for 2 centuries, Oliver. Patience is not the same as permission. We gave time to this institution. We did not give it the right to define us. I went to my terminal. I drafted the filing. It was 3 paragraphs long, formal, correct, entirely within council procedural rules. I read it twice. I added 1 sentence at the end. Earth remains committed to the principles of galactic community and looks forward to resumed participation upon conclusion of the review period. I sent it. Then I booked a transport home. I sent messages to the senior staff telling them to begin organized departure procedures. I asked Claire Dunmore to initiate the maintenance protocols for non-essential systems. I called Leon and told him it was done. He was quiet for a moment. How did the session go? I said what needed to be said, I told him. The rest is up to them. Do you think they'll change? I thought about that. I thought about 200 years. I thought about 43 people and 60 million thirsty beings and a word written in a notebook. I think they'll have 90 days to decide if they want to, I said. That is more than they gave us. That night, for the first time in 11 years, I packed my office. It did not take long. I am not someone who accumulates things. Paper, pens, notebooks, a photograph from home, a small stone from a beach in Wales where I grew up. I held the stone for a moment before I put it in the bag. It was smooth and gray and had been shaped by the sea over thousands of years, without hurry, without drama, without asking anyone's permission. I packed it. I took one last look out the window. The stars. I had looked at them from this window so many times that I knew their positions the way you know the faces of people you have lived with for a long time. Steady, constant, burning with patient energy regardless of what happened in the small, complicated room behind me. I picked up my bag, turned off the light and walked out. The corridor was empty at this hour. My footsteps were quiet. The station hummed around me, systems cycling through their routines, the infrastructure of a galactic institution doing what infrastructure does, running quietly without acknowledgement, making everything else possible. Some of that infrastructure was ours. Not all of it enough. I reached the docking bay. Oliver was there with the rest of the essential staff. The transport was ready. I walked up the ramp without stopping, found a seat by a window, and looked out as the docking clamps released and the station slowly fell away behind us. I opened my notebook to a clean page. At the top I wrote, Day 1. Then I put the pen down and watched the station grow small and distant among the stars, a complicated structure built over 300 years, running on systems that a great many people had never thought to examine too closely. I wondered how long it would take them to feel the difference. I did not have to wonder long. By the time we reached the first nav point, 3 hours out from the station, my secure line had received messages from 22 delegations, 2 from the Grand Arbiter's office, and 1 from Delegate Sorvin personally. Sorvin's message was brief. It said that the Velthari considered Earth's action premature and called upon Earth to reconsider. I read it twice. Then I wrote in my notebook, underneath Day 1. They called it premature. 19 months ago, we called the Kethvelthari collapse a probability and filed a 68-page report. They called that alarmist. It seems our sense of timing and theirs have always been somewhat different. I closed the notebook. I went to make tea. Through the transport window, the stars continued doing what they had always done, burning quietly at enormous distances in the patient dark. We were going home. 61 days into the 90-day suspension, the delegation arrived at Earth. I met them in Nairobi. Not in a government complex, not in the Council Liaison Center in Geneva, which would have been the obvious venue. I chose the Africa Regional Coordination Office, a functional building in a good part of the city, with windows that looked out over a park where children were playing. It was a deliberate choice. This was a working meeting, not a ceremony. Earth was not performing power. Earth was doing business. The delegation consisted of 5 beings. The Grand Arbiter Pilith, a Velthari senior envoy named the Honorable Darius Vel, who was not Delegate Sorvin, which told me that the Velthari had decided to send someone who could actually listen. 2 representatives from species that had quietly aligned themselves with Earth in the weeks since our departure, and an independent observer from the Council's Neutral Review Board, a being named Senth, who was there to ensure that whatever was agreed would be procedurally sound. I greeted them in the entrance hall. I shook hands with each of them because Earth does that, and after 61 days without us, they had all apparently decided to accept the custom without comment. My team was Henry Cole, who had been with me for 9 years, Claire Dunmore, our infrastructure lead, a policy analyst named Grace Harlow, who was 29 years old and had more understanding of galactic economic interdependence than most beings 3 times her age, and Oliver, who was taking notes and had, in the past 2 months, learned a great deal about what it means to be patient. We sat at a conference table. There was tea. There was water. The park outside the window was visible to everyone in the room. I had thought about the view carefully. It showed a living city, children running between trees, ordinary human life, ordinary and continuous and entirely real. Pilith opened the meeting with the formal greeting. I returned it. Then he said, Earth suspension has created significant operational difficulties across multiple council systems. We know, I said. We have been monitoring the situation. The difficulties have not been catastrophic, he continued carefully, because your essential systems have remained in maintenance mode and your technical staff have continued to fulfill critical service obligations. But the strain is considerable. Yes, I said, it would be. Darius Vel spoke for the first time. Her voice was quieter than Sorvin's and more deliberate. Ambassador Marin, the Velthari would like to understand Earth's conditions for resumed participation. Not conditions, I said. A framework. There is a difference. Conditions are demands. A framework is a description of the relationship we are willing to have going forward. And what does that relationship look like? I nodded to Grace, who opened the document. The new participation framework, I said, has 3 core components. I will walk through each one. The first component was council representation reform. Earth was proposing a revised vote weighting system, tied to a combination of population, infrastructure contribution, and demonstrated historical compliance with council resolutions. This would shift weight away from a handful of old, dominant blocks and toward species whose contributions to the council's actual functioning were not reflected in their current voting influence. The Velthari representative was very still as Grace explained the numbers. I watched her face. The second component, I continued, is the Inclusion and Accountability Protocol. This is a formal, enforceable commitment that any council decision which disproportionately affects a member species must include structured consultation with that species before the vote occurs. Breaches of this protocol would be reviewable by an independent panel. Pilith cleared his throat gently. The review mechanism. Is necessary, Henry said pleasantly. Without it, the protocol is aspirational rather than functional. Earth is not interested in aspirational commitments. I continued. The third component is a formal acknowledgement by the Council of the contributions of all member species to shared infrastructure and services, including a historical record of those contributions that would be publicly maintained and updated on a standard cycle. This last point was the one I had thought about most carefully. It was not the most practically significant of the three. It was, in some ways, the most symbolically significant. It was a record, a real one, the kind that could not be ignored or forgotten or casually dismissed by a future delegate who had not been in the room when the work was done. It was the kind of thing that, 200 years ago, might have meant that Earth's water proposal had been treated differently. Not because of the record itself, but because of the culture that keeping such a record creates. A culture where contributions are seen, where the invisible work becomes visible. I wanted that culture, not for Earth alone, for the 60 million beings on water-scarce colony worlds, for every small species that showed up to this council every session and went home with nothing. Darice Vel looked at the document for a long time. Then she said, "The voting reform proposal will face significant resistance from established blocs." "I know," I said. "That resistance is itself a demonstration of why the reform is necessary. Earth understands this will take time to implement." "We have always been patient," I said, "but we are no longer willing to be patient without a direction." The meeting went on for 4 hours. There were many questions. Henry and Grace handled most of the technical detail. I handled the moments when the conversation went quiet and needed someone to hold it steady. At the end of the 4th hour, Pelith looked at me across the table. "Ambassador Marin," he said, "Earth has clearly thought about this for a long time." "Since before I was born," I said honestly. "I want to ask you a direct question, not as grand arbiter, as a being who has watched this institution for 30 years. He paused. "Do you believe the council can change?" I looked at him. I thought about the stone from the beach in Wales, shaped by water over thousands of years. Patient, constant water. "I believe change requires pressure," I said. "I believe this institution has not felt the right kind of pressure before. Now it has. What it does with that pressure will tell us more than anything I could predict." Pelith nodded slowly. The signing of the preliminary framework agreement happened in the early evening. It was not a dramatic moment. Documents were signed. A record was made. Hands were shaken again. I walked the delegation to the entrance. The park outside was evening lit now, and the children were gone home, and the trees were quiet in the late sun. At the door, Darice Vel turned to me. She was a being of considerable dignity, and she chose her words carefully. "Ambassador, I would like to say something that is not formal." I waited. "The Velthari delegation was wrong to treat Earth's contributions as trivial," she said. "I do not know if that will mean anything, but it is true, and I wanted to say it directly." I looked at her. "It means something," I said. "Thank you." She left. The others followed. I stood in the entrance hall with Henry and Grace and Oliver, watching the vehicles disappear down the street. Oliver looked at me. "Do you think they'll hold to it?" "I think some of them will try," I said. "I think others will find it very difficult when the political pressures come back. I think we will have to watch carefully and be ready to respond when commitments are tested." "That sounds like it never ends." "It doesn't," I said. "That is what it means to be part of a community. It is ongoing. It requires continuous attention." I picked up my bag. "But tonight it ends. Tonight we go home, eat a proper meal, and sleep. Tomorrow we begin the work of making the framework real." We drove back through Nairobi in the early evening light. The city was alive around us. Ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, the way human cities always are. built by people who showed up every day and did what needed doing, without always knowing what it would one day amount to. At the house where I was staying, I went to the back garden and sat for a while in the dark. The sky above Nairobi was hazy with city light, but you could still see stars if you looked carefully. I looked. They were the same stars I had watched from the council station window for 11 years. The same ones I had watched from this world my whole life. Steady, patient, burning with quiet, persistent energy. I thought about my grandmother who had told me, when I was very small, that the stars did not need our permission to shine. I thought that was the most important thing anyone had ever told me about power. You did not need anyone's permission to do what you were built to do. You simply needed to do it, consistently, for long enough that the evidence of your doing became impossible to look away from. We had done that. For 2 centuries we had done that. And now, perhaps, the doing could begin to mean something different. Not just proof of what Earth was capable of. A foundation for what the community, all of it, the whole complicated, difficult, luminous community of this galaxy, might yet become. It was not a certainty. I have never dealt in certainties. I deal in data and time and careful observation. But it was a possibility, a real one, earned, not given. I went inside. On the desk, my notebook was open to the last page I had written on. I turned to a new page. At the top, in my ordinary handwriting, I wrote the first entry in a new notebook. The same words. The words I always write when I begin something that I intend to see through. Day 1. Then below it, something I had not written before. They are trying again, so are we. Let us see who means it. I closed the notebook. The house was quiet. Outside, Nairobi hummed with its own patient, continuous life. In the distance, someone was playing music. It drifted through the window like something carried on water. Tomorrow there would be work. There is always work. The framework had to be implemented. The votes had to be won, one by one, in a chamber full of beings who were still learning that Earth was not a minor player to be managed, but a full partner to be reckoned with. The records had to be built. The infrastructure had to be reviewed and restructured in ways that were fair and transparent, and documented so thoroughly that no one could ever again look at what Earth had done and call it merely charming. There would be resistance. There would be setbacks. There would be moments when the old patterns reasserted themselves, and it would be necessary to hold firm, quietly, without drama, and remind everyone what was at stake. I was prepared for all of that. What I had not been prepared for, not fully, was how it would feel to be sitting in a garden in the city where my mother was born, listening to music drift through a quiet evening, knowing that something had shifted. Not everything, not yet, but something real. Something that had started with 2 words written in a notebook at the bottom of a page that also contained the word charming. Begin review. 2 words, 11 years of careful watching before them, 200 years of quiet, determined presence before that. And now, maybe, a different kind of beginning. I went to sleep. I did not dream, or if I did, I do not remember it. In the morning, I made tea, opened my notebook and started writing. There was a lot of work to do. Earth was very good at work. We would be fine.